Here's a watercolor trick that will not only change the looks of your paintings, but also make a part of the process much faster. Let's see what this trick is first, and then I'll show you how to use it while painting this large realistic eye. It all starts with a powerful tool. Recently, I discovered watercolor sticks. I even made a very detailed technique video about them that I'll link to at the end of this video. These sticks sparked an idea that is completely changing the way I'm going to paint with regular watercolors coming forward, and maybe it will change the way you paint too. This is the titanium white watercolor stick from Daniel Smith. I went and ordered just that one after I made the original watercolor stick video where I used 4 regular colors. While standard colors of watercolor sticks will give you a normal watercolor look with fun techniques as a bonus, this stick in particular can also achieve certain effects that will transform a painting completely in the most agreeable way. That's why it's so great. Titanium white is known to be a white watercolor that you can get in tubes or pans and that resembles white gouache. In the form of a stick, this titanium white watercolor is a super powerful tool, even more so if you're someone who has been adding highlights to your paintings. If not, you still want to see how this stick will improve your paintings so dramatically. Like white gouache, titanium white watercolor will help you create pastel shades when you mix it to other colors, and it's great for highlights when you use it on darker colors. On the Daniel Smith website, they back this up too. They mention titanium white is a semi-opaque watercolor, which means it has some transparency, but also a level of opacity. But let me show you how in a stick, this changes everything. So you might wonder, what's so special about a watercolor stick? I decided to go for a large painting to show you very clearly what that does. But it will work on any size, and because I had planned to try the stick for the highlights already, I'll speed up this part where I painted the base layer and more layers on this eye. I always start with layers and shadows to build up depth and realism. Then I always add highlights to my paintings, and I do it with white gouache most of the time. Sometimes I do it with a gel pen, and I find that even though these are great, there are things that don't work for me, and that's where the stick comes in. Now if you're ready to see how it works, we're going to try the stick on this eye painting. I've been using this bottle of gouache ever since I started watercolor. You can even see it in my previous videos. And first, look at how much more compact a stick is. Imagine how easy and mess-free it's going to be now to carry the stick instead of the gouache. That's one thing. Another one is even if you have a small gouache tube or a small titanium white tube, you have probably noticed how easily it will waste the paint because, well, it's hard to squeeze just the right quantity out. And when that dries, it's a pain to wash, so I'm not going to regret that. I like that I can get the consistency and the amount that I need right from the stick without a paintbrush and in a few seconds. Just wet the tip of the stick in your water jar and keep rubbing it to the palette to thicken that mix or add water if that's what you need. You can use this technique whenever you want to add subtle highlights, which we're going to do. And that's why I'll keep a creamy mix for now. You'll see there are other very interesting ways to use this, and we'll look at that in a moment. For light, subtle highlights, I'm really using this mix in a traditional way. I work with my usual paintbrushes in the same way I did when I applied colors on this eye. When I want to have smooth and subtle highlights without harsh lines, I pre-wet the paper with a clean paintbrush and I just dump the white paint there. Keep in mind this dries lighter, hence a creamy mix. If I had added a lot of water to it, we wouldn't see these highlights much after they dry. If you're running out and you need more, it's super simple, just repeat what we did earlier. Another way to work from a puddle of white paint, whether or not it comes from the stick, is to paint on paper and fade that paint into the previous layers with a wet and damp paintbrush. I keep this technique for areas on which one side of the highlight doesn't need to be softened. An effective ninja technique you can use a stick for, and for that gouache will work the same, is to just mix the white paint with a certain color to get that color to look more opaque on top of normal watercolors, like I'm doing with the veins here. I'll do it later with the lighter eyelashes. It's really nice to make a color of watercolor pop against other colors and avoid any transparency. That's where things are getting super interesting. A difficult thing with gouache or just working with a tube of watercolor is to get the right consistency, especially when you want to increase opacity. With the stick, it's easy to make sure your paint looks opaque in just one little use of a wet paintbrush. Use that paintbrush on the stick directly. Look at how fast that was. It's easier and quicker to get a thick consistency with a stick, since it's so localized and it would be hard adding too much water to the stick anyways. You can really see what you're doing compared to mixing white paint in a white palette too. A little goes a long way, and you can even add more from the stick directly to get even more opacity on a specific area. When you do that, make sure the first layer of white paint has dried so you can add that extra layer. It's so easy to go back and forth between the stick and the paintbrush to adjust to only the amount that you need. I'm happy I get to use the stick in place of white gouache because I know for sure it's the same quantity as my other paints. All these I'm using in this painting are Daniel Smith. I know this Daniel Smith titanium white color is light fast too, so it's great. I like that in the pupil, it's easy to navigate between these sharp white areas and lighter areas. It's agreeable to switch from one to another this fast. If you keep a clean and damp paintbrush nearby, you can always add water to a thick mix you apply on paper. Again here, I'm applying a second layer of white paint for more intensity because my first layer has dried. For using gouache for my first 3.5 years of watercolor, I can tell you this titanium white watercolor does not disappoint in terms of what it can do. It can get as opaque as what I've been having with gouache, and it can also be made very transparent with water, like gouache. For now, really, I only see a bunch of bonuses to using white paint as a stick. And before I forget, it's also very economical compared to the same color in a tube. I waited to add the eyelashes because most of the highlights needed space. With a night painting, you really want to mind that and add this dark paint almost last, because if you try to re-wet it for highlights, then you might reactivate some of it and get the painting to look muddy. Some of the eyelashes are dark to light brown, so I'm using this pastel color technique again by mixing white paint to yellow and black. Without white paint, a light color like this would not show much otherwise on top of other watercolors. And it's not very visible here. That's exactly what I want in the eyelashes. I need this lighter color to be discreet and just help make the darker lashes look more realistic. A cool trick you want to use the stick for is to use the tip directly on paper. If it's dirty, all you have to do is clean it up with a wet piece of fabric. Super easy. If I was to just say something negative about a stick, that's when it's so wet at the tip, you want to use a towel or something to lay it on just so you don't get some on the table, but other than that, really, it's not very messy. Now the tip is wet from cleaning it up. If not, dipping it in the water does the trick. I can tap the stick directly on paper for added texture and very bright highlights. With a tube, you need pure paint, and with a paintbrush, it can be harder to deposit, although for some areas it works good. With a white watercolor pan, bright highlights will be very hard to get, so it's one more thing to take into consideration. The downside of using a stick is it's thick, so it could be hard to make bright highlights on a smaller scale. In this case, you can still cut a piece from the stick and use it for more precision. To find out about the many techniques this stick and all of this can provide, I suggest you to watch this video next, where I'll show you all the watercolor sticks hacks I came up with. Thanks for watching and see you next time.